Shut up and sit down.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another edition of ROX Talks, brought to you by ROX Network. I'm Carrie-Anne Grove, and this evening's guest is British author Richard Houghton. If you're not aware of his books, then you certainly should be, because he's published quite a few, and they offer a different perspective. If you're tired of reading the usual biographies and autobiographies with retreaded and rediscovered archival photos and text, these books may be for you. Written from the fan's perspective, these are the insider guide to what it was like to be at these concerts, to experience music by the greats like Thin Lizzy, Black Sabbath, Simple Minds, the Rolling Stones, Jethro Tull, to name but a few of his books. His latest book, Pink Floyd, I Was There, is another brilliant insight into the world of the Pink Floyd fan and their sights, sounds and emotions of seeing that legendary progressive rock band, Pink Floyd, in their heyday. I really do struggle. Oh, okay. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
That's okay. Nice to talk to you.
First of all, Richard, let's introduce people to who you are and your sort of background as a writer.
Okay, so my name's Richard Houghton. I'm 63 years old, originally from Northamptonshire in England. I now live in Manchester and have lived in the northwest of England for the last 30 years. And I've been writing books about music for about the last 10 years.
What made you decide to start writing about music?
Well, I've always wanted to be a writer, ever since I was a little kid. Very first story I wrote was, I was about 6 years old, and I wrote a story called Peter the Pixie, which my mum was so impressed by that she asked my older cousin to do some illustrations for it. And somewhere in a cardboard box, I've still got that story and the illustrations that she did. So, it was always an ambition of mine to get a book published. But I never finished the job, and then got a proper day job, an office job, which kept me occupied for the next 30-something years. And then finally, a few years ago, I went to see the Stones, went to see the Rolling Stones in Stockholm on their On Fire tour in 2014. And I'm a big Rolling Stones fan, and I've got lots of books I've collected about the Stones over the years. But it just occurred to me when I was at that concert that Mick, who had just celebrated, I think, his 71st birthday, was somebody who'd got fans who'd been following the Stones for more than 50 years, and yet I'd never actually read a book that told the Stones story from the point of view of the fans. So that's what I decided to do. I hunted down Stones fans around the UK, in the US, in Australia, and put together a book about the Rolling Stones, telling their story from the front row, from the fans' point of view. People who saw them from the very early days before they even had a record out, right through until 1969 and the death of Brian Jones. And from doing the book about the Stones, because it was the 60s, people were telling me about their experiences of growing up in the 60s, what the fashions were like, what it was like only having 2 channels on the television,
Mm.
what it was like when the pub shut at 10:30 and all that kind of thing. Things that younger people probably don't
No.
understand because they never had to live through that. But people also gave me stories about the Beatles. So although I started off writing a book about the Stones, by the end of it, I'd actually got a quarter of a way towards a book about the Beatles. So it seemed a natural progression to do a book about them. And then I thought, well, who else is there who's a big beast who's out there in the rock world? And I went on to The Who, and it just snowballed from there, really. So since then, I've done books on Jimi Hendrix, Led Zepp, Thin Lizzy, Queen, and now I've turned my attention to Pink Floyd.
Has it always been rock for you, or do you have a wide range of musical tastes?
If I tried to pretend that I had a wide range of musical tastes, you'd better catch me out by asking me 1 or 2 questions. So, I
No,
like
not at all.
a
No.
little bit of reggae, a little bit of folk, a little bit of country. But really, if you haven't got the guitar turned up loud, it's probably not going to appeal to me. I'm not a fan at all of rap or anything released after 1980, if the truth be told.
Good taste. Good taste indeed.
I'm definitely a dinosaur in that regard, and I'm proud of it.
It was the best music. What can I say? Do you find it was more interesting to write books from the fan perspective rather than just do the usual sort of autobiographies?
Well, that was one of the reasons why when I did the Stones book, I didn't want to try and tell their story again because, like I
Mm.
said, I've got more than 200 books about the Stones myself. There's probably another 200 out there at least, and unless you're actually going to get to talk to the main men, and I didn't envisage Mick Jagger and Keith Richards wanted to chat to me anytime soon. Mostly, what you're doing is rehashing what's been written
Yeah.
before, and and that's true of all the big bands. There's so many books have been written about Zeppelin and Floyd, or people like Dylan, that it's really very, very hard to write a book that's telling it anew. But it just struck me that fans often have got their own story they've never told to anybody, or they've only told to their family or told to their mates down the pub, and that it would be a nice idea just to try and capture some of those memories, particularly because people are getting on, so memories
Hmm.
aren't what they used to be, or indeed, people won't necessarily be here in a few years' time to tell those stories. But also because back in the 60s and the early 70s, there was obviously no internet, there was no
No.
Instagram, there was no YouTube, so all this stuff wasn't captured on smartphones. Whereas today, you go to a gig, by the time you get home, it can all be up on YouTube. You can watch what you've just seen, which is probably a forest of iPhones and
Mm.
Android phones being held up in the air in front of you. But also, if you did take a camera to a gig in the 60s or 70s, it's probably one of those terrible
Yeah,
playback
really.
informatics.
Yeah.
And if you got a photograph, the photographs probably came out brown, and all you got was the pictures of the
Mm.
backs of people's heads because the flash only worked about 10 feet in front of you. So there you are thinking, I've got a fantastic shot of, I don't know, David Bowie, like my sister-in-law did. And actually Bowie is a little tiny blurry speck in the distance. But it's a cracking picture of the woman in front of her, the back of her head.
It's a shame, really, isn't it, that so many of those great moments in rock history are effectively locked in people's minds. We don't have that video footage. In some cases, we've got the audio from like bootlegs and things, but there's been some amazing concerts over the years and some amazing albums and events. And as you say, if somebody doesn't record these um, memories, then they will be lost for future generations.
Yeah, and I mean, you make a good point about bootlegs, actually, because every time a new bootleg is discovered, or somebody remembers a cassette they've got tucked away in a shoebox in their attic, if they then share that with people who are experts in that band, there's somebody out there. And I've read a story for the Pink Floyd book. This guy in America had taped a bit of a show that he went to. Somebody else had also taped the same show, but they didn't necessarily tape the same bits. So somebody's been able to put together a more complete recording of that concert. And by marrying up the two tapes where they did record the same songs. They've got a better audio transcript of the show than existed before. But there's no video for lots of these concerts, and
No.
some of the videos that you do see, the old VHSs, the lighting's quite poor by modern standards. Camera work's not what it is these days. You know, we have become very spoiled, haven't we?
We
With
have
steady
indeed, yeah.
cams and and all the computerized lighting and the massive effects that go into shows. It was very much more basic in the early 70s and often in the 60s. Of course, there was no lighting at all. It was turn the house lights off and off we go.
Absolutely. You just mentioned Pink Floyd, and is that book completed, or is it available yet?
It's at the printers at the moment, so it will
Brilliant.
be out in about 6 weeks. So it runs to 432 pages. It's over 500 fan memories, and it starts off going back to 1966 in Cambridge, which is where Sid Barrett and Roger and Nick and Richard Wright started out. So it's, you know, there's people who were there at the very start of Pink Floyd and who were involved with the band or in the band's inner circle, including when Sid, you know, left the band and was replaced by David Gilmour. It goes through the 70s, so it covers, you know, the explosion in Pink Floyd's popularity with the success of Dark Side of the Moon, which went on to sell over 45 million copies, and then goes on also to look at the, you know, the falling out between Roger and the rest of the band, and a little bit about their solo careers post Floyd as well. So, and it's all told from the fans' perspective. So sometimes you'll have a couple of people at the same concert who remember similar things, or sometimes they remember completely different things. One person will say what a fantastic concert it was, and somebody else will say, oh, it was awful, the sound was terrible, or they didn't remember it because they took magic mushrooms and their judgment of the evening was clouded as a result. And I think what's really interesting about the Floyd book, and it's true of some of the other books as well, but particularly Floyd, is how different British audiences reacted to going to see Pink Floyd compared with American ones. So British audiences might have indulged in a little bit of a smoking dope or something, but generally, you know, people getting off on something, it was a couple of pints of bitter down the pub beforehand. In America, there are numerous tales from people of arriving very early for a show because it'd be a big outdoor summer show, and they then proceed to take industrial amounts of LSD or various other chemicals, so that by the time the show actually happens, they're actually quite wasted or in a very, very relaxed mental state. And of course, that was one of the things that Roger Waters was quite annoyed about, I think, towards the end of Floyd's career, that
It was
they
indeed,
wanted, they wanted the audiences to listen to them, and actually the audiences were often so wasted they were hollering out requests and shouting and throwing frisbees and generally doing anything other than listening to the music.
And then lighting fireworks, which was another pet hate of Roger Waters and Pink Floyd in general. But it's was the Pink Floyd one a labour of love, or are they not necessarily one of your sort of top 10 bands?
That's a good question. I bought Animals when it came out. I was 17, or it might have been 16. I was 17 a couple of months later. And what I particularly remember is living in Northamptonshire, we could either go over to Leicester for gigs, or we go down to London because it didn't live that far from a mainline railway station. So getting to London was actually not too hard. And my mates were talking about going to Wembley to see the Animals tour, the In the Flesh tour. And I decided not to go. And I think the reason I decided not to go is because Black Sabbath were also doing gigs and I couldn't afford to go to both. And I chose to go to Sabbath rather than Pink Floyd. Which, of course, you might think, well, why didn't you go to both, Richard? But, you know, I think I had a paper round, but I didn't have a lot of money. My mum and dad didn't have a lot of money.
That's another thing. We had to choose which bands we went to see.
Yeah. And, you know, I I did, like I said, I did buy Animals when it came out. I've still got it. I know exactly where all the clicks and scratches are on the album because it's been very well played over the years. And I acquired all the other albums on vinyl in the subsequent years. But no, I actually never saw them. Never saw them live, which is a real regret.
Well, as you say, that we had to pick and choose back then. You hadn't got much money to go around, and you had to sort of weigh up which one what really wanted to see. And then kids today seem to have endless funds to go and see whatever concerts they like, which is maybe why they don't appreciate concerts quite as much.
Yeah, and yet, I've got all of my concert tickets framed and on the wall in 3 or 4 places around the house, and I look at the prices, and I paid £1.25, I think, to go and see Queen at Earl's Court, and I'm thinking, were they really that expensive, concert tickets? Why couldn't I afford a Floyd ticket as well? There must have been something else going on in my life that meant I couldn't go. It can't have been down to price alone. But 45 years later, I can't remember what the reason was.
Is there any band that you would love to do next? What's in the orbit for you to do next, band wise?
I think Genesis are the band I'd like to do next.
Oh, very cool.
Particularly because, again, their audience is getting older, and the band themselves, obviously, have,
Phil
as I
Collins
understand it, have
is
stopped
really
following
unwell.
the recent. Yeah. But also, you've got all those very early Genesis shows when Peter Gabriel was a singer, and they were groundbreaking concerts with the costumes and the effects and the stuff that they were coming out. And I just feel that's, again, it's pre-video. There might be bootlegs out there, but a lot of the knowledge, the understanding, the memory, the love for Genesis will be what people have written down in their diaries, or the stories they've got in their head, the stories they've told to their friends. And it'd be lovely to try and capture some of those.
Absolutely. So girls and boys, if you have any memories from Genesis, to get in touch with. You have a flood of them now, I hope.
That would be absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, obviously, once this video goes out, we'll share your information anyway. So fingers crossed you can get lots of input. I'm sure there will be for Genesis because they have been such a loved band over the years.
They have, and it's one of the things I'm always fascinated by is when you think of all the new music that's coming out all the time. And so if somebody's a teenager and they haven't got a well-educated parent who's guiding them down the right paths to listen to the right kind of music, how do they discover the Genesis, the Pink Floyd, because those kind of bands aren't featured on radio unless you know where to look.
No.
So if you're a young person navigating the world musically, it'd be fantastic to actually suddenly stumble across Pink Floyd, or stumble across Genesis, or stumble across Led Zeppelin for the first time. I quite envy people in that sense, that they might have musical journeys they've yet to go on.
Well, some might say our musical journeys never end, but maybe they just narrow slightly over the years. And what about you personally, Richard? What are your hobbies and interests outside of writing?
Well, I'm a Manchester City fan, which some people will be booing at this point when they hear that. I'm a Manchester City fan by marriage, really, because my wife's a big fan. And living up in the northwest, it was like, well, what are you going to do on a Saturday afternoon? You might as well come with me to the game. And I'm also a Northampton Town fan. So, if the Cobblers ever made it into the Premiership, that's where my true loyalties lie. And other than that, I buy and read books and fill the house up with books, and I walk the dog 3 times a day, whether I want to or not, because he wants walking 3 times a day.
Thank you so much for your time, Rich. It's been lovely talking to you. And do keep in touch and let us know about this Genesis book and what your plans are for the But whether it's Genesis or not Genesis, just do let us know which ones you're working on, and we'll send memories your way.
I will do that, and thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. You take good care of yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.